A couple of weeks back, we discussed the Irish housing crisis, and we said how the principal contributory factor to the current crisis was supply. Not enough houses are being built for the purposes of private residential ownership in the state, leading to a disconnect between supply and demand. This naturally leads to an increase in prices, with the likes of young people bearing the brunt of the consequences as they're squeezed out of the housing market. This problem is exacerbated by conservative lending policies imposed by the Central Bank of Ireland, making it all the more difficult to get a mortgage and buy a house in the country. However, the government on Thursday unveiled their Housing for All plan. This is effectively the government's master plan to solve all the various problems associated with the housing system in Ireland. Those problems include a shortage of supply in the private sector, a shortage of social housing, increasing housing prices, homelessness, high costs of development, vacant and unused housing stock, and non-environmentally friendly housing stock. In today's video, we're taking a look at the details of the plan and whether or not it's the solution that the Irish people have been looking for. Before we do, could I ask that you take 2 seconds out of your day to leave a like on the video, and if you are new around here, don't forget to subscribe. And let me know, what are your thoughts on the government's Housing for All plan? Do you think it looks good, or are you still not totally convinced? The government begin their report by saying that their objective is for everybody to have access to sustainable, good quality housing to purchase or rent at an affordable price, built to a high standard and located close to essential services, offering a high quality of life. In order to achieve that objective, over €20 billion will be allocated over the next 5 years to transform the housing system, representing the largest housing budget in the history of the state. Housing for All has 4 key objectives of its own. Number 1, supporting home ownership and increasing affordability. Number 2, eradicating homelessness, increasing social housing delivery and supporting social inclusion. Number 3, increasing new housing supply. And number 4, addressing vacancy issues and the efficient use of existing housing stock. Two of the main schemes under the Housing for All plan, which aim to help first-time buyers to purchase their own home, are the Affordable Purchase Scheme and the First Home Affordable Purchase Shared Equity Scheme. Essentially, the purpose of these schemes is to address one of the biggest issues facing buyers, the fact that they're constrained in their ability to obtain a sufficient mortgage based on their income. So the gap between the price of the home and the mortgage that the buyer can obtain will be bridged by these schemes. An example is provided where we have a first-time buyer with a household income of €70,000. They wish to purchase a home valued at €320,000, which would require a deposit of 10% or €32,000. However, the maximum mortgage that they can obtain is 3.5 times their income, which is €245,000. Now, the mortgage plus the deposit comes out to a total of €277,000, resulting in a gap of €43,000 between the market value of the property and the total funds available. The First Home Shared Equity Scheme will bridge this gap of €43,000, giving the state an interest in the property, but also allowing the first-time buyer to purchase the home. There's going to be an increased obligation on developers, which will allow for affordable and cost rental housing as well as social housing to be developed. Cost rental housing essentially means that the rents charged on the property only cover the costs associated with the property, thereby removing any profit element. These properties will be rented at a price that's at least 25% below market rent. The government has also limited rent increases in rent pressure zones until the end of 2024, meaning that the rent in these zones cannot increase at a rate which is higher than the rate of household inflation. Housing for All aims to work towards eradicating homelessness by 2030, with 90,000 social homes being delivered by that date. This is actually part of a new European-wide initiative to combating homelessness, which commits all signatory countries, including Ireland, to the battle. This involves prevention measures, access to permanent housing, and support services for those who are currently homeless. The Housing First initiative is also being extended and expanded to achieve an average of 240 new permanent tenancies per year, targeted at individuals who have a history of homelessness. Funding for mental health support, healthcare plans, and drug and alcohol treatment services are also being expanded under the plan. With respect to social housing, the government's attention is shifting to building and not buying social homes. An average of 9,500 newly built social homes is targeted for each of the next 5 years, funded through record level investment. The government addresses the use of rental properties owned by real estate investment funds for social housing purposes by stating that given the current supply challenges, it will be necessary to continue to provide social housing via the private rental market for now to ensure that those who are most vulnerable in society can access support immediately. Under the Housing for All plan, 300,000 homes will be built by 2030 in order to address the pressure on the housing market. This comes out to 33,000 new homes each year on average. Minister for Housing Darragh O'Brien said in the press release that the plan is radical but realistic and is backed by unprecedented levels of funding. Over €12 billion in funding will come directly from the Exchequer, which begs the question as to whether or not we're going to see an increase in taxes in the near future to pay for not only the Housing for All plan, but also the pandemic payments, which took a serious toll on our overall debt levels. The plan will also see all appropriate state-owned land used for housing supply purposes. This responsibility will fall to the Land Development Agency, who will coordinate the development of the land. It's estimated that state-owned land alone could deliver up to 15,000 homes. A startling statistic in the report showed that there are approximately between 70 and 80,000 residential units with planning permission granted in the state that have not yet commenced development. A lot of this comes down to affordability barriers, i.e. not being able to develop apartments for the purposes of sale at a price that people can afford. A new fund called the Cities Fund is being established whereby taxpayer money will be made available for the purposes of investment in residential development, thereby ensuring that apartments are being developed for the purposes of sale in cities at a lower price that people can afford. One of the more interesting policy changes being introduced is the vacant land tax, which seeks to penalise non-development of residential land. The hope being that this will encourage prompt development of residential units. Now you might be thinking 300,000 homes sounds great, but who's going to build them? Well, the government is aiming to increase apprenticeship registrations to 10,000 per annum, which is almost double 2020's intake. It's estimated that between 67,500 and 80,000 full-time workers will be needed in housing construction to fulfill the government's development expectations. That number at present is currently 40,000, so a lot more human capital is needed. The report notes that the capital requirement, which is the amount of money needed to provide an average of 33,000 homes each year until 2030, is estimated at €12 billion each year. This will of course be funded through a mixture of both public and private funding, with the goal being to maximise the number of homes built while also maximising the value for money for the Exchequer. Institutional investors, i.e. investment funds, are going to play a key role in bridging the funding gap between what's required and what's available. They are just one of the many funding options available for the plan. The general idea here is that the government don't want to see properties lying idle while people are homeless or living in unsuitable accommodation. Therefore, a key objective under the plan will be for local authorities to complete compulsory purchase order acquisitions of vacant properties and make them available for sale or rent on the open market. The estimated figure is at least 2,500 vacant units by 2026. Some significant changes are being made to the Fair Deal scheme as well, aimed at encouraging homes to be sold or rented on the market. Local authorities will also work towards completing unfinished or so-called ghost estates and get them occupied insofar as possible, given that many of these estates are located in low demand areas. Similar to the vacant land tax, a vacant property tax will likely be introduced sometime in the near future, and this will be based on data collected from the local property tax returns, which are due in November this year, and these should highlight some data around vacancy levels in residential property. An interesting point which was brought up up in this section of the report was that vacancy is only part of the problem. Another part of the problem is the fact that many households no longer occupy the full potential of their property, primarily because they've gotten older and their children have moved on. One suggestion here was to offer a lower rate of stamp duty tax when purchasing a property for the purposes of right sizing, i.e. moving to a property which is more suitable to the current living requirements of the household. So what are my thoughts on the Housing for All plan? Having read through all 160 pages of this report, there is no denying that a lot of thought and effort has gone into this plan. I think a lot of people underestimate how complex the housing situation is, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I'm an expert on it either. With that being said, what the government is proposing in theory makes sense. Now, when it comes to actually putting the plan in place and meeting the targets set out in the report, that's a whole other story. But it's clear that a massive priority for government is the provision of immediate and long-term social housing, which is great. My question from a tax perspective concerns what tax policy changes will be required in order to account for the increased expenditure. Let's not forget that we also have a pandemic to pay for, as well as an unsustainable state pension that will need to be addressed in the near future. So it certainly will be interesting to see what tax changes are in store down the line. I think the new shared equity schemes are an interesting initiative to bridge the gap and allow first-time buyers to acquire a home. However, the real issue here lies within the conservative lending policies imposed by the central bank. I'm not necessarily saying that the Irish people should be exposed to higher levels of debt, but I think a temporary easing of measures in certain scenarios might help alleviate some of the pressure. As prices start to come down, the situation should improve also, but that might not be for a few years yet. Overall, and at the risk of sounding naive, I'm optimistic for the future of housing in Ireland. However, actions speak far louder than words, and we'll need to monitor how the state is performing against the targets it has set for itself in the years to come. So I really do hope you enjoyed the video here today. As always, if you did enjoy the video, please do let me know in the comment section below. Leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel, and let me know, what are your opinions on the Housing for All plan? Are you optimistic for the future, or are you not so optimistic for the future? And I'll see you all in the next video. Cheers!